We're back in session. We're going to start with item 3.5, district obligation to full-time faculty hires. Executive Vice Chancellor Eric Skinner, please come forward. Thank you. Oh, and as a as a housekeeping note, we will be adjourning exactly at noon, so we'll come back to whatever subject we're on at that time when we come back from lunch. Please proceed.
Sure. President Malumed, Chancellor Scott, members of the Board of Governors, the item before you is the matter of district obligations for full-time faculty hires. This is the annual determination that you're required to provide through our, as specified in our Title V regulations. And the determination is whether or not the full-time faculty obligation number, or also called the full-time faculty obligation, will be required to increase for fall 2011. And the process that's laid out in Title V regulations is that by November 20th of each year, the Board of Governors shall look at the enacted budget and make a determination as to whether or not that budget contains sufficient resources to support an increase in the faculty obligation for the following fall. And in doing so, regulations call on you to look at three funding factors. The first of which is whether or not growth funding is provided. The second of which is whether or not a cost of living adjustment has been provided. And lastly, whether or not other core funds have been provided. And so that's the process that's outlined in our regulations. And in that process, the Chancellor's Office is tasked with coming forward with a recommendation to the Board to help guide your decision. So what I'd like to do is first note a little bit of history on this. The faculty obligation has been frozen for fall 2009 and then again for fall 2010. And that's because of the tough budgets that we've experienced due to the state's budget crisis. Our recommendation, and I'll just cut to the chase on this, the recommendation I'm bringing forward is that the obligation be frozen again for fall 2011, and I'd like to step through the rationale behind that and a little bit of the thinking. This is a little bit awkward in the sense that the budget presentation, where you'll receive a more full, complete, comprehensive briefing on the enacted budget, is not until this afternoon. So what I'm going to do is focus on the key elements this morning, and I think that there's enough information that I can condense for you in a relatively short package here that'll allow you to make a determination. So essentially, looking at this 2010-11 budget that was enacted in October, it's overall, my characterization of it is it's a very flat budget, that it carries forward many of the shortfalls and liabilities that were in the 2009-10 budget. It leaves them unaddressed. And so in many ways, I think it continues to be a very tough budget for our colleges as they attempt to meet the overwhelming demand for education and training that they're facing at these times. So to step through some of these three specific funding elements, I'll start with the growth funding. The 2010-11 budget does provide growth. It provides $126 million. That would support a 2.2% increase in full-time equivalent students. But what's important to note here is essentially the way the state funded this, the way the legislature and the governor funded this, was by simultaneously with one hand, they give the colleges $126 million for enrollment growth in the current year. At the same time, they take $129 million of base funding and push those dollars into next year, into July 2011. So this deferral, this funding deferral, is in effect it's putting that growth funding on a credit card, if you will. They're asking colleges to grow this year, but the increase in resources won't appear till next year. So it's clearly an inferior way for us to receive the funds. It adds instability. And it also again asks districts to increase their workload and investment this year, while the money won't follow till next year. Clearly, it's a highly leveraged kind of budget, and that'll be one of the themes that I'll go through this afternoon. Is that there's considerable borrowing, tricks, smoke and mirrors that's used to cobble together the state budget, and for us, that's the main way it's played out. Is that growth funding, while it's provided on its face, it's really being funded through this deferral mechanism. So that's growth. Secondly, cost of living adjustment. The budget provides a zero COLA, zero cost of living adjustment for the colleges, and the background on this is that the federal factors that are used to calculate the COLA for the colleges actually generates a slight negative COLA this year, minus 0.39%, and that's just a function of the economic variables that are used to calculate that, and so it's showing in effect a slight deflation in costs. I think that's probably not the reality most of our colleges are facing, as healthcare costs and other costs continue to drive up. But that is from a technical perspective, that COLA should be a slight negative number. But the state budget provides a zero COLA. Just to provide context on that, I'd add that the state budget also failed to provide a COLA in 2009-10 and 2008-9, and the combined COLA in those 2 years was almost 9.5%, and so those were cost of living adjustments our colleges did not receive that they should have received under the federal indicator, and the net impact of that was a reduction in spending power for our colleges of over $500 million. So that was a hole that's in the budgets of our colleges, a reduction in their spending power that's been there for a couple years, and it remains. And then lastly, on other core funds, this is perhaps the most troubling aspect of the budget for the colleges, in that in 2009-10, the state budget cut funding for student support programs, for categorical programs, by over 40%. So it was a $313 million cut in core funding to support student services, assessment, placement, counseling, tutoring, the core programs that the colleges need to help promote student success and help students proceed towards their educational goals and objectives in a timely and effective way. So that cut in core funding that was enacted in 2009-10 rolls forward with no relief in the 10-11 budget. So that's those are the three elements that you're called on to look at when making this determination of sufficient resources. And our recommendation looking at that is that, simply put, this budget does not provide the resources to support an increase in the faculty obligation number. And that's I did want to characterize for you the conversation at Consultation Council. We take that seriously, bringing this topic through the consultative process. And at the October Consultation Council meeting, this was a contentious item. There were sharply divided views. Just to, in general terms, the faculty groups were arguing for a finding of sufficient resources, and I think that their rationale relied primarily on the kind of a view of the funding criteria, and taking and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but you know, looking at these criteria in a narrow, using narrow definitions. Was growth provided? Yes, the state budget does provide $126 million for enrollment growth. Was a COLA provided? Yes, the zero COLA meets the technical definition of a COLA. And I don't mean to, you know, there's no editorial comment that, you know, I think that from a technical perspective, those arguments can be made, and that's what I heard at Consultation Council. In general, management groups felt that the budget did not contain sufficient resources to support an increase in the faculty obligation number, and for very much I think using the rationale that I provided as I walked through the state budget. So it was a fairly contentious item. There was also considerable conversation about the larger issue of what has been the pattern, what's the trend line in terms of full-time faculty, the number and percentage of full-time faculty in our system. And I would say I think there was very much a shared view that the objective of trying to increase the percentage of full-time faculty and the number of full-time faculty in our system was a shared goal amongst all parties. And I think that was the point of commonality that I heard at Consultation Council. And there was an acknowledgement that moving towards that 75% of courses being taught by full-time faculty is still a meritorious goal, and that those full-time faculty bring with them a great deal of it's a cohesive influence. They provide the institutional glue at the campus level to support students and to support the mission of the college. So that goal I don't think is in question. It's really a matter of, does this budget provide sufficient resources to move forward towards that goal? And so that's the matter that's before you, and I'm available for questions, and that's the issue as I see it.
Before we start talking, I would like to share with the board that I've received many letters, and I wanted to mention they're all in support of the board supporting this, that we do not have adequate funding to support an increase in district full-time faculty hiring obligations for fall of 2011. Chancellor Gregory Gray from Riverside Community College District supports it. Bruce Barron, Interim Chancellor, San Bernardino Community College District. Chancellor Deborah Blue, State Center Community College District. Helen Benjamin, Chancellor, Contra Costa Community College District. Steve Meridian, Interim Superintendent, President, Lake Tahoe Community College. Chancellor Mesnick, Ventura County Community College District. Cindy Miles, Chancellor, Grossmont, Cuyamaca Community College District. And President of the San Diego and Imperial Counties Community College Association. Lori Stank, Vice Chair, Monterey Peninsula College Governing Board of Trustees. Eva Kinsman, Trustee, Copper Mountain College. And 3 of the trustees from Glendale Community College also wrote letters. Any questions or comments about the subject? Member Thomas and Member Baca.
A question. I thoroughly support full-time staffing in all constituencies, not just faculty, but across the board. And I know that that's, it actually includes full-time students. That would be good as well. The question that I had, and I thought maybe briefly you could help me understand, when we saw these numbers, I was anticipating seeing more progress just because of the budget cuts that were made this last fall term, especially in the areas of adjunct faculty. That's just the natural place where things would cut, and I didn't see the kinds of progress that I had expected. Is there some other factors in there by Executive Vice Chancellor Skinner that contribute to not seeing the kind of progress we might have thought we would see?
Well, so I think that the type of progress on this front that we'd expect to see during these tough times is as districts let go, release their part-time faculty, don't bring them back to teach additional courses, then the percentage of full-time faculty is likely to rise. And you're right, in the numbers that we provided, and so this is the second attachment, there is not a appreciable increase in the percentage of full-time faculty. And I think that the reason is simply that this data is from fall 2009. And I think it's taking the snapshot is too early really to see the effects of that. There is a slight increase. There's a very slight increase from 57.71% in fall 2008. That's a percent of full-time faculty, up to 57.75%. Very slight increase. My guess is when we see the new data for fall 2010, that percentage will go up considerably. And we'll have that data by the end of this month and should be available in a public forum by sometime in my guess would be in December. And again, I think the percentage will go up. I think what you'll probably also see, though, is the number of full-time faculty will likely decline. Maybe not significantly, but that would fit with a pattern of districts continuing to try to, they're trying to make ongoing budget cuts to bring their resources, bring their spending in, their ongoing spending in line with their ongoing resources. Districts by and large, districts haven't resolved those issues yet. And so as they continue to try to make headway on bringing their long-term budget plans into alignment, steps such as not replacing full-time faculty or retiring, that's one of the strategies that's used. So that's my guess is you'll see more of the progress at least on the percentage terms in the next snapshot.
Thank you.
Member Baca?
Well, I had 3 questions. That was one of them, so down to 2. Related question. In terms of the downsides or maintenance of that ratio, in the career tech areas where you may have a greater degree of part-timers, is there, I don't know if you can answer this or not at this point, but is there a sense that some colleges are struggling more in terms of this ratio because of the number of full-time versus part-time factor, because simply the organization of their career tech area versus the academic transfer programs?
I am not aware. I'm trying to think of where that might have shown up in any of the reporting or even conversations I've been having with chief business officers. But there is no question that I think adjunct faculty are oftentimes used more intensively in the career technical education fields for strategic policy reasons, oftentimes, in terms of having an active.
I guess the more basic question is, those colleges, districts that have a larger presence of those programs, are they the ones that usually have the greater difficulty in achieving that ratio?
I'd like to go back and look at that a little more carefully. I don't think that's the general pattern. Now, that may be a factor in some individual instances, but I think that that there are other factors that are more more significant in terms of shaping it. One of the most significant is that when this requirement went into place, it took a snapshot. It locked in based on staffing patterns that were in place in the year it took effect. And so if a district, for instance, had a high number of full-time faculty in that year, it locked in a higher requirement for that district. if a district had a lower number of full-time faculty in that year, they worked off that lower base. Those kind of factors, I think, tend to have a stronger impact on you know, how challenging it is for a district to meet that obligation.
Okay. Let me ask you a different question here, because we're proposing here to kind of put things in moratorium for a bit of time, and because these two questions we just asked are influencing that ratio. What is your perception overall? Obviously, some districts do not have the ability to really address many short-term, even immediate issues because the reserves are really depleted, versus those that maybe have heftier reserves who could possibly maintain a level or even adjust that level because of the changing variations, and be able to put on hold, in effect, that ratio. I'm not sure if I'm being real clear on that, but statewide, without naming districts, how many of those districts do you think could actually influence that ratio in a positive way in terms of the full-time obligation based on the reserves that they have?
Well, that is a complex question. I think that an important factor to keep in mind is that the reserves are one-time funds.
Absolutely.
And so when you're really talking about changing your percentage or your number of full-time faculty, I think that by and large districts will use, excuse me.
Excuse me for interrupting you, but, you know, and I understand that. You can't have a long-term commitment based on one-time funds, certainly. But you can certainly address in some form the use of those funds to achieve or at least maintain a certain level, given that you've got multiple variables that are moving on you.
Right.
And I guess that if the ability for local districts to address this is there, what is the commitment there to actually doing it? I don't expect for you to be able to respond to that, but you could certainly respond to what we understand about different district budgets, college budgets around the state. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's not so much a question, but just simply a thing of a great deal of interest, at least to some of us here.
Absolutely. I think there's a large policy issues. If you know, there was another piece of information I want to share, and I think it has some bearing on it relates to your question in a way. In terms of how, you know, the level of difficulty that districts are having complying with the full-time faculty obligation, and in the digest in the board item, we covered that briefly in terms of the compliance, and what we found was that in fall 2009, we had 2 districts that were out of compliance with the faculty obligation number, and so 2 districts actually failed to meet the obligation. Mm-hmm. And the consequence for that is there's really very little relief that can be provided once a district fails to comply. But what happens is there's a financial penalty the district pays, which is essentially the replacement cost for the full-time faculty. And so if a district is out of compliance by 4 full-time faculty, it's that times a replacement cost, which is roughly $67,000, and that fiscal penalty then is paid to the state. So it's you know, that we had 2 districts that were out of compliance. We had 7 more districts that complied using an alternative compliance mechanism that's only available in these insufficiently funded years. So 7 districts complied by, they have the option of maintaining at least the same percentage of full-time faculty as they employed in the prior fall. So if they carry forward just the percentage of full-time faculty, their number can drop, but as long as they employ the same percentage or greater than the prior fall, they're able to comply. 7 districts were needed to go to that alternative compliance criteria in order to meet their obligation. And the remaining districts, the other 63 districts, complied in the conventional manner. So I know that's not a direct answer to your question, but I think it maybe provides a little bit of a flavor of that the districts are having trouble keeping up. And again, this is fall 2009. We'll have the fall 2010 numbers within the next month or so.
It's really, just one last thing. It's really a question of priority. And the check that I'd like to have is that the priorities aren't being rearranged because there's an opportunity for them to be able to do that, and they just simply shift the priority somewhere else. I'll leave it at that.
Member Baum, McDougall, and then Azumi.
Thank you, and thank you, Eric, for Vice Chancellor Skinner, for the report. It may seem provocative, but as I look at the data, to me it appears that this policy that is actually encouraging less progress toward reaching the 75 percentile. I strongly believe that the more full-time instructors you can get in the classroom, the better for students' success on a variety of factors. And the fact that these numbers were developed and certain institutions were locked in based on a certain point in time and measured against that has actually led to less progress toward getting more full-time instructors in the classroom. Because as I look at this data, I see several institutions that are close to the 75%. They have 59, 60, 65, 70% of their instruction is provided by full-time instructors, yet they're being penalized for falling short of the full-time faculty obligation. And then there's other institutions with 40, 45, 48, 50% of full-time instructors, and they're considered well above their full-time faculty obligation. So the way that this system was set up, and correct me if I'm wrong, actually provides those institutions that at the point that census was taken, they have very little incentive to kind of get above 48% on their full-time instructional load. And so that's puzzling and frustrating to me as I review this data, because they all seem like districts that have adequate resources to make major progress towards increasing the full-time faculty instruction. And this system is actually providing a disincentive for them to do so.
Well, those are some provocative comments. In my view, the main barrier towards greater progress on this front has simply been insufficient funding in the state budget, and that erosion of spending power over time. I think there are many criticisms you can level at the faculty obligation number. I think there are inequities that are built into it. It really, if you really think through the mechanism, it doesn't do anything to increase the percentage or the number of full-time faculty, or it doesn't do anything to increase the percentage of full-time faculty. What it ensures is that as you grow, you at least, you don't lose ground. So it's a floor. It doesn't really provide much upward pressure. It's a cumbersome calculation. It really lacks transparency. It drives our staff crazy in the chancellor's office, and I'm sure at the local level. So there are many criticisms you can level towards it. But I think that the main reason why we're seeing a lack of progress on this metric of full-time faculty is more just insufficiency of resources. Sure. But again, it's a charge issue.
And I don't hold you. You're implementing a policy that was given, but it just seems like the system is broken in such a way that provides an institution who's got a 48% full-time faculty little incentive to get to 70%, other than hopefully leadership at the institution and on the academic and the administrative say to make that progress. But there's little financial incentive to do so.
Member McDougall.
Yes, a comment and then a request. First, a comment. I will support the recommendation. I think it is a very sound recommendation given the financial situation in which the community colleges unfortunately find themselves. But I will do so, and I'm sure this will hold for every board member. vote with reluctance because of what it does to the system. And if we look at just over the 2-year period based on the data that we have received, there's a reduction of about 2.5 to 2.6 faculty members full-time per every college in the system. That is not a direction that I think any of us would feel very enthusiastic about, warranted though it may be, but it shows there's a problem. So that's my comment. My request is that I think the policy as written is written on the assumption that financial difficulties that would occur might occur for a 1 or 2 year period. I don't think anyone could have necessarily forecasted the situation in which the system has found itself for the last 3 years, 4 years, and may well find itself for the next 2 or 3 years into the future. So I think as we look at this item coming before us again, we need to look not just at the specifics of the policy, but the erosion of funding that has occurred overall and how we can respond in a way that supports the objective of more full-time faculty, but does not put districts in a position of being hurt immeasurably by it. The one other part of the request is I think we need to look at the situation of if a district chooses not to comply, there is a financial penalty that is provided. My understanding, however, is that financial penalty is a 1-year penalty.
Correct.
And that you go into the future, you now have a reset for your full-time faculty obligation, and it may even be cost-effective to eat the cost, if you will, during the first year to save over subsequent years where your obligation is lower. And I just think that needs to be looked at because everyone tries to find ways of dealing with a tough situation. That may not be a particularly good one. And it may be that if there's a financial penalty, that penalty has a continuing consequence. I recognize that it's a 1 year, and my assumption was that it was not continuous after that.
Just to respond to that, the penalty is a 1-year penalty.
Right.
It does not rebench the obligation number downward. So what the district has is the opportunity to hire more faculty in the next year to catch back up. But if they
I
if they
thought it
miss
reset the figure.
I'm
Okay, maybe we just
I don't
confirm
believe so,
that
but
one way or the
I will
other.
confirm that, but I don't believe that's the case.
Okay.
Okay. Member Izumi?
Thank you very much, Executive Vice Chancellor. Appreciate the comments of my fellow board members. Just wanted to ask, you gave us the figures on growth, COLA, and the core categoricals, that sort of thing. Now, you also said, I think it's been said that the projections for revenues for, the budget are based upon, not the soundest of assumptions, and so that it's possible that even what you've told us may not be the full extent of how bad it could be in terms of, let's say, a mid-year correction,
Right.
so that even based upon, even let's say, a narrow interpretation, that may not be the case in the, let's say, 4 or 5 months from now. Is that true?
That is true. The numbers that I presented are I did not include a risk of mid-year cuts. And really, my counsel on that would be that our regulations provide you with the option of opening this issue up again in the event of mid-year cuts. And so I think that's a risk you don't need to take into account at this point. I think on its face, just with the baseline numbers, even if there aren't mid-year cuts, I think my recommendation would still be to find insufficient resources. But if you were to find that there are sufficient resources, and then there are mid-year cuts, you would have, through our regulations, you would have the ability to open up that issue later. So, but the way it's crafted in the regulations, I think you could almost put that risk aside.
Thank you.
Chancellor Scott, and then we'll go to public's comments.
Well, I would just add to, I think, the excellent comments that Vice Chancellor Skinner has already made. I think we need to underline the fact that there's agreement on the value of full-time faculty. I don't think any of us would say an institution would be better off if it were 90% part-time and 10% full-time. And I remember, it's one of the advantages of being around a long time, I remember when this law came into effect. And I remember at Pasadena City College, we began to add full-time faculty because the state funded it. And then we hit the wall in the early 90s. It wasn't as bad as now, but it was bad. We didn't get any COLA, and we didn't get any growth. And so we suddenly, you know, we were moving, and even now, Pasadena City College is around 68, 69% or something like that. But we moved over 70% at that time. So this is a real issue of, in these tough times, are we going to add another mandate on to districts? And I don't think we can do that. We took an 8% cut last year. So we haven't recovered, even if we were to get that 2.2% enrollment growth, which, you know, they deferred it till next year on us. But I would like to see full-time counselors. I'd like to see more classified staff. The classified staff were cut, and we didn't add those back in. Most districts didn't. They just had to eat it. That's the problem. The problem is a lack of funding. So if we put this mandate on districts, then we are saying, if you choose to bring back some of the categorical people that took even a sharper cut than anybody else, we can't do that. We know that there might be mid-year cuts, but let's just don't think about that. Let's just look at the last 3 years. No COLA for 3 years. 1 year, an 8% cut. The next year, we maybe got a 2.2% enrollment growth, but even that is not paid for till next year. I don't see how we can say, but you've got to do this, instead of saying, live with, you know, the scarce resources you've got and do the best you can with faculty and classified staff and counselors and all the rest. And so that's why we all make a reluctant recommendation. It's not, you know, what we really think we ought to have is all these last 5 years, if we'd have been getting a 5% COLA and gotten 3 or 4% growth, we would be in good shape, and we would have had more ways to serve all those students who frankly just didn't get an education this year. 140,000 students, we estimate, we didn't even let in the doors. Well, we let them in the doors, couldn't find any classes.
Right.
That's a bad thing to do. We educated 200,000, for which we got no funding. So this is not we're not describing here a sort of halfway good situation. We're describing, and I hate to use the word dire, but it's fairly dire, the situation we're in. And that's why we reluctantly make this recommendation. We didn't, you know, if we had had COLA the last 3 years and had enrollment growth, it'd be easy for us to say, well, let's just keep moving in this direction. But it's awfully tough to tell districts, no, we're going to close, we're going to tell you, you've got to do this, and yet you just live with all of these cuts. So that's why the Chancellor's Office has reluctantly made this recommendation to the Board of Governors, and I would recommend that you adopt it.
Vice President Himmelstein? Oh, Member Davis-Lyman?
Thank you. Vice Chancellor Skinner, in the information that's compiled, what kind of information do we have about reserve funds? And historically, the last 5 or 10 years, how districts have used that or not used that? Are some districts and colleges using reserve funds to meet, or at least not to meet, but to move a little on the fund? What kind of information, what can you share with us about the use of reserve funds?
The data we collect, the easiest thing for us to identify is simply the level of reserve, you know, the ending balance. And I'm trying to jog my memory to see, to think through if there are other reports that we might be able to kind of peer inside that a little more carefully. But I think that that's what you're describing is beyond what we can really report on a system-wide basis. I think the reserves have been largely level over the last couple of years, and from my conversations with CBOs, there seems to be, especially in times with great risks, such as the times we're in now, there's this tendency to want to try to hold on to those reserves because we don't know if we're going to be in a special session and be dealing with mid-year cuts in a couple months or in January. So I think by and large those reserves, districts have been using them to cushion the impacts of this, so that those 9/10 cuts that came late in the year, districts went to those reserves. But then I think most districts are finding ways to kind of carve out and replenish those reserves going into 10/11 is the general sense I'm getting. And again, because there's a feeling that the risk is still there. We're not through the woods. So in terms of the finer points of how districts have used those reserve funds in this area, I'm not sure that we as a system really have that data to provide a kind of system-wide trends on that. I could try to dig more deeply or do some surveying, but I think we're challenged in that area.
Well, as the chancellor said, we're in dire times.
Yeah.
That's what reserves are for, one of the reasons, right? Why
Right.
we have reserves. Thank you.
I would go ahead and align myself with the comments of all of my colleagues here and the chancellor in terms of our reluctance, but I am going to go ahead and move the recommendation.
I second that.
Okay.
Don't we have to listen to public comment?
Yes, and now we will listen to comments from the public.
Yes. First up is Dennis Frisch from FAC. Remind all commenters we're limited to 3 minutes.
Good morning and thank you. I'm Dennis Frisch from FAC, President-elect of FAC, and I've come to indicate first that FAC remains opposed to the recommendation before you. We've noted that each time the recommendation has come to you not to trigger, we've heard what the Executive Vice Chancellor has also said, that everybody agrees it is desirable to have more full-time faculty, but we watch the percentages go down. So, and the percentages we're currently looking at are not good. We all recognize that. So FAC now urges the Board of Governors, as money begins to return to the community colleges, maybe this year, maybe not, but next year or in 2 years' time, that this board begin to demonstrate leadership to the entire system, and particularly to the faculty, both full and part-time, who are working way beyond the call of duty to maintain the integrity and the quality of education in the system. That this board then begin to demonstrate the leadership that full-time faculty hiring is the first priority in this system, and that it be mandatory when there is money back in the system. That kind of leadership would go a long way to demonstrating to the rank and file faculty that there is a commitment to quality education and a commitment to the full-time faculty and the work they do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Carl Friedlander with the Community College Council.
Thank you. I appreciate your thoughtful discussion of this difficult topic, but I would also like to urge you to reject the recommendation and vote to trigger the increase. My concern is that the issues that have been discussed, while they're certainly very real, the financial problems, as explained, They will be there next year and the year following. I don't think any member of this board expects that the state is going to fund the 9.5% lost COLA from a few years back that Vice Chancellor Skinner spoke about. This is, as they say, the new reality that we're in. But a part of that reality is also our need to provide the best possible education to the students in our system. And I don't believe that our system can do that if it continues to try to meet student need by expanding the adjunct faculty ranks while the core of full-time faculty in the system shrinks. And by the way, even prior to the current crisis, we made no progress in the ratio of full-time to part-time faculty. The numbers, other than for a few years that Chancellor Scott spoke about, never really increased significantly. And I think it does come down to a question of what's most important for this system. And the reality is that there are significant reserves in the system at most colleges. And if the will is there to do this, it can be done. The only reason that we're in this position is because of a situation that shouldn't exist, and that is the tremendous difference in cost in many districts between full-time and part-time faculty. So in effect, what we're doing is saying we're going to meet need with a cheap labor force, and that's how we're going to address the fiscal problems that we're facing. In some districts that have done a remarkable job in maintaining some kind of parity, there isn't that big difference, and typically those districts are the districts that actually have the best ratios in the state, because it's not a cost-saving decision to hire part-time faculty or full-time faculty. It's an educational decision based on need and the realities of our student situation. And I think that's the place we all need to get to in all of the districts across the state. And if the board, the previous 2 years and this year and next year, says we're not going to require an increase, and keep in mind that this increase does not trigger a massive amount of hiring across the states. The system is already remarkably 1,000 or 1,500 or so full-time faculty above this very minimal obligation that the system has. I think it's important that we move forward. It would require some districts to do a minimal amount of hiring. Reserves are there, and the danger is, without sending that signal, that the priority will be that even in the worst of times, the goal is to further build reserves, which are increasingly being characterized as one-time money, which is a characterization that I don't agree with, rather than to do what needs to be done and build the core of faculty so that this system can do a better job of serving the students of the California community colleges.
Thank you. Lynette, and I apologize, it looks like Nyaga?
Whoa, perfect.
Oh, very good. From CCA-CTA.
Good morning. I do appreciate Chancellor Scott's reference to students, because that's what we're really about here. And this is why faculty groups are particularly concerned about the waiver for the third year of this full-time obligation number. I would, however, characterize our discussion at Consultation Council as lively rather than contentious. But indeed, looking at it on the ground as a faculty member, what it means is that at one of the colleges, there are no full-time economics faculty to do the work of that department. And I think we're all concerned about that. And this is why we are asking that you not vote for this for the third year in a row. And I would like to just say one more thing about the reserves. I understand the characterization as one-time money for a district that has a reserve this year and last year. But if a district shows a consistent reserve of double digits for the past 7 or 10 years, and that reserve is growing, then the taxpayers' money is not actually being used to do the work of the college. It is being used it's being put into an account somewhere, and that's really not what taxpayer money is for. So I would suggest to the board that you do take a look at the reserves. You can look at the ending balances of these colleges for the past 10 years and see, have they gone up, down? By looking at that, you can see whether there's a pattern of increase, which there is actually, in the reserves. And also, we don't want reserves to become an issue with the public, because we need the money, the public wants the money to be used for colleges, for the students, more than anything, to make sure there are no classes cut and that the work of the college gets done, the faculty are able to do that work. So we in CCA-CTA are asking you, please, not to accept the recommendation to freeze for the 3rd year in a row. Thank you.
Thank you. Georgia Mercer or Jeanette Mann from Los Angeles Community College District.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm here as a member of the League Board in my capacity as the immediate past president of the CCCT Board, and I'm also president of the board of the LA Community Colleges. So do I get 9 minutes?
Very good try.
Very good try. Anyway, it seems like almost everything's been said, but not everybody has said it, so here I am. The League supports hiring more full-time faculty when it is done not at the expense of student access or student support programs. And at this time of unprecedented demand, mandating increased hiring of full-time faculty without restoring our categorical programs will lead to reduced access and reduced student services. It's as simple as that, but of course it's not simple to implement. The League encourages colleges to maintain student success categorical programs even with the additional cut of $35 million caused by the governor's veto. This will be made more difficult if colleges are required to instead use the money to hire new full-time faculty positions. The new governor and every legislator we talk with acknowledge that the 2010-11 budget will be reopened. While the League supports new revenues rather than more cuts as a solution, even the rosiest scenario likely will lead to significant additional state budget cuts. By supporting the Chancellor's recommendation of not triggering the requirement for fall 2011, we are simply delaying the state mandate to hire the positions until the fiscal outlook is clearer. In the end, if the growth funding is maintained throughout the year, the positions will have to be filled sooner or later. And I just would like to add a little note about Los Angeles Community College District. More than 110 new faculty members joined our district's ranks this fall at an additional cost of $3.8 million. And the district has already begun developing our plan for hiring new faculty for the 2011-12 academic year. All of us on the board are deeply committed to the goal of, the highest level of full-time faculty. We all understand how that enhances the quality of opportunity for our students, but we're just in a very precarious financial situation right now. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Eloy Oakley, president of Long Beach City College.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Board, Governors, Chancellor. I am here, I'm the president of Long Beach City College, but I'm here in the capacity of a member of the League CEO Board, and we want to voice our support of the Chancellor's recommendation, the Chancellor's Office recommendation to hold the number. On behalf of all the CEOs who are charged with ensuring the fiscal health of their institutions, we continue to feel that the fiscal situation in California is still not stable enough to continue to begin to grow our colleges again in terms of faculty hires. Faculty hires are happening. Certainly, Long Beach City College is beginning the recruitment of 15 full-time faculty hires. But the question is, do we begin to push that number further now when, at a time when the growth, COLA, the fiscal health of our colleges is still very unstable? Just as an example, there was a lot of talk today about reserves. And I can only speak on behalf of Long Beach City College, but this is the third year in a row where we have submitted a budget to our board that's a deficit budget. We continue to spend down our reserves. We continue to do everything we can to stabilize those reserves. Some districts have achieved that at a greater pace than others, but the whole point for having reserves is to ensure the fiscal health of our colleges and to ensure that we can offer the classes that our students need. There is no doubt that a key to student success is having full-time faculty in our classrooms. And we will continue to look for ways to ensure that that happens. But we ask the board to support the recommendation and to help us continue to bring our colleges together, nurse them back to fiscal health, and find a point in time where we can continue and hopefully expand the number of full-time faculty, because I think that's something we can all agree on, that more full-time faculty for the long-term health of our system is a necessity. So thank you for this opportunity, and we look forward to hearing your recommendation.
Thank you. Professor John Smith, California Community College Independence.
All right. Madam President, Chancellor, Board of Governors, and audience, I'm here representing the California Community College Independence, some of the other larger and smaller colleges across the state who have voiced their opposition to not supporting an increase in the FON number. Speaking, however, just on behalf of my own institution, one of those ones that Chancellor Skinner said was in the B group that qualified through the alternate method of having increased their percentage only because the number of retirees we've had and the number of sections that we've cut that have effectively been the workload of part-time faculty have seen an increase of almost 5% towards our great ratio of 75-25. However, as we have done that, our reserves have jumped, and the jump has been really almost $5 million in this last year due to the fact that we are not replacing any full-time people, classified people, administrators, and certainly teachers. And with that drop in full-time teachers, I must ask you to also consider the other side of the coin. Besides the great work that we do to try to serve our students, we've had increased pressure from that other organization whose acronym I'll only briefly give you, that thing called ACCJC, who has asked us now this year to do our third accreditation report. We had a accreditation report, we had a follow-up just in case there was something that needed to be addressed right away, and now we have a midterm report that we're working on. All of this is taking a lot of time away from full-time faculty. The district's choice is either to allow full-time faculty to work on satisfying the SLOs, the assessment, the reports that come up with a shrinking base, or to hire more part-time administrators to try and do faculty work. And that's why I want to ask you to consider the long-term effect of not increasing the faculty obligation number. Last but not least, in this whole idea is the fact that Chancellor Scott has mentioned that among the retirees we've had on our campuses have certainly been a number of counselors and librarians, a number of people from the programs that have been slashed, and without pressure on the districts to increase the teaching faculty obligation number, we have almost no hope of arguing in our individual districts to increase the number of counselors, to restore EOP&S and other programs that have proved their worth. There is a sort of negative background if you ease pressure off for one more year, that these other positions that are, vital to our students' health go unfilled. Thank you.
Thank you. Jane Patton from the Academic Senate.
Thank you, President Malumed, members of the board, Chancellor Scott. In 2009, there were 42,500 part-time faculty in California community colleges. And how many full-timers do you think there were? 18,000. We're talking about 42.5 versus 18. It's a huge discrepancy, and we just heard the Chancellor remind us about our new SB 1440 degrees, and he'll be talking about SB 1143 implementation. The work of these important pieces of legislation require full-time faculty to make them happen. I know that you recall the packet of materials I gave you last year with a collection of articles about the need for full-time faculty. There is a strong correlation between student success and full-time faculty, and especially at a time where categorical programs have been reduced, the students really need to have their full-time faculty support. So I appreciate the comments of many of the board members who I believe sincerely believe we need to have more full-time faculty, but I would ask the board to consider what kind of commitment you can make, and the commitment may not be able to wait until California figures out all of its budget woes. So maybe in the interim there is something else you can do to not move away from the full-time faculty obligation. Of course, I urge you to not approve the proposal, although I know you will, but I hope that you will seriously think about long-term commitments to the need for our students being served by full-time faculty. Thank you.
Thank you. Final speaker, Scott Lay from the League.
By final speaker, you mean you're in between us and lunch, I believe. The League is absolutely committed to seeing more full-time faculty in our system. And I have to note that many times in the system's history, administrative organizations didn't say that. So that is a change and a shift, that we stand together and are deeply concerned about the qualitative decline of this system. You mentioned the 11% budget cuts from Ms. Cola's over the last couple of years. This is a real dire situation. I did want to talk briefly about reserves because I've heard some comments suggesting that a 15% reserve on an annual and ongoing basis is imprudent. However, remember that the state didn't pay colleges for 3 months this year, which equaled 15% of the state apportionment paid out to colleges. So if colleges didn't have that 15% reserve, they weren't going to make payroll. And some didn't and had to go out and borrow money from banks and paid interest. So you're going to pay one way or another. And so it's like my wife and I, we keep an extra house payment in our mortgage account. Does that mean that we're wealthy? Well, no. It means that if something happens, we can pay our mortgage 1 year, and if something doesn't happen, or one month, and if something doesn't happen in the community college world, such as no state budget, then we can make payroll for a few months. That's what reserves are for. And then, of course, you replenish them as soon as the state budget came in, and that's what districts did when they got their apportionment payments the last couple of months. So don't look at ending balances and think that it means that colleges are hoarding money. Finally, there is this ongoing issue, and Member Baum brought it up, of the inequity of the calculation. Take two neighboring districts, one of whom was penalized this year. District A, and both districts are neighboring. They have about the same number of students, about the same amount of money. District A has a full-time faculty percentage of 58.5% and 237 full-time faculty. District B has a full-time faculty percentage of 66.9% and has 323 full-time faculty. Now, between those two, one with 237 full-time faculty and one with 323, which one was penalized this year? The one with more full-time faculty with a greater percentage. And if we pulled the trigger today, it is only District B that's going to have to hire new full-time faculty. I believe it's about 13 positions. District A, even with a much lower percentage, would not be required to do anything. So that's a long-term issue, and people don't like to talk about it because we only talk about this issue when it comes up in November, and there's no good way to equalize these rates. That's kind of a strategic problem I think that we all have as a system. You declined to establish a task force last year on this issue because until we start seeing resources, we really can't address it in the long term. So I just wanted to point those couple of issues out and, of course, support the Chancellor's recommendation.
Thank you. I would like to make, do I see a hand going up? Member Baca?
You know, I would like to see if we could amend the motion a little bit to reflect our interest in and support of the full-time faculty initiatives. And also, and I think it's a legitimate concern, this matter of the reserves. And I do recognize that by and large they are limited in terms of duration, funding, but in some cases that might be an exception. The fact is that we hear a lot about it, but we don't seem to have a good handle on it. So I don't know if the motion could be amended first to reflect the board's commitment to the full-time obligation, but also to include a review in the coming months of that issue of the reserves, because I think it is a legitimate concern and one worthy of discussion, because we seem to have opposing and different views of it. So I don't know if we could do that.
Member Bach, I would, you know, I think the motion is to approve or not approve the recommendation. I share your desire for information vis-a-vis the reserves and would be open to supporting a secondary motion or direction to staff to bring something back on that. I think all the members of the board have expressed a commitment and desire to raise the level of full-time faculty. So if it's okay with you, I'd just as soon keep the motion, and I'm certainly supportive of direction to staff to bring something back.
Well, on the first part of it, I don't know that that's a major change in terms of the recommendation, but just simply that reflects the intent of the board in support of the Chancellor's recommendation. The other thing I think, though, is something that I'd like not to have us lose sight of, because I think it's a legitimate item for discussion, certainly in the coming months. This isn't a one-year thing, so it's something I think it's worth you a look at.
Chancellor Scott.
And we can, as Member Himmelstein has said, we can vote on the original motion and then talk about reserves. I don't mind at all providing what information we have available on reserves. But you have to keep in mind that that's not a decision we make. That's a decision we can make some kind of recommendation on. But reserves, as perhaps some of the local trustees would remind you, is a decision that's made at the local level. So we can look at the reserves and we can maybe make recommendations on ways that reserves could be handled. But I just want to make sure that everybody understood that we have no authority over local reserves.
Chancellor, and I certainly recognize that, only that it impacts on our decision, to the extent that it impacts on our decision. I think.
Sure. Well, as I said, we'll be happy to whatever. I mean, I think, for instance, that Vice Chancellor Skinner could provide you with the ending balance of every district. Couldn't you do that?
Yes, and over time too as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So we can, and then I don't know what else information you want. We're happy to do that. I just said that, and I know you as a local trustee understand that, but I wanted everybody to understand that because I try to kind of keep a line drawn between what the Chancellor's authority and the Board of Governors' authority is and what local trustees, and we are a much more independent organization than, say, is characteristic of either CSU or UC.
Member Perez?
I would just like to ask for some additional information if we're going to look at some trending. And I would like to be able to look at least the last 4 years of the full-time faculty as well as part-time faculty. We see a 2-year review here, only a full-time, but I think it's important that in addition to looking at reserves, we look at the actual numbers, because I know a lot of the colleges have been reducing part-time faculty, and I think for us to really look at this, we need to look at the big picture of this. And so if we can have the information brought back not only on the reserves from a trending perspective, but also look at what's happened full-time faculty as well as part-time, at least over a 4-year period, I think that would be helpful for us in making our decisions.
Okay.
And then can we call for the vote?
Yes. Comment?
And I just wanted to note on that, the attachment 2 does take have a longer span. It goes back to 2005. So it might have a portion of what you want, but if there are additional elements, just let me know, and I'd be happy to provide whatever I can.
Okay. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed? Opposed? No. Abstentions? Seeing none, we will break for lunch and come back at 2 o'clock